And when it comes to the gas prices, we're going through an incredible transition that is taking place that, God willing, when it's over, we'll be stronger and the world will be stronger and less reliant on fossil fuels.
This incredible transition that Biden speaks about has been painful, especially for those who struggle to pay the increasing costs. But we are told we will emerge in a better, cleaner place. Will we?
The idea is that renewables are better for the environment, but it turns out that they take 300 to 400 times more land from solar panels than from a nuclear or natural gas plant. They require 17 times more steel and about the same amount more cement than does a nuclear plant. And then you're right, all of that additional materials becomes waste on the back end. The state of California has for almost a decade been figuring out what to do with all the used solar panels, because as soon as you remove them from your roof, they become hazardous waste. It's about 300 times more waste from solar panels as from nuclear.
A report by the World Economic Forum states that to meet the Paris Accords climate goals and limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, 100 million electric cars will have to be built by 2030. However, the report also notes that the production of lithium-ion batteries for electric cars emits twice as much CO2 and uses double the amount of energy as building a gasoline-powered car. This creates what is called a carbon debt for electric vehicles. A carbon debt means that in countries like the US and Germany, the average person will have to drive an electric car for 9 years or 80,000 miles to make up for the extra CO2 emissions that came from building it, compared to a diesel-powered car, and half as much for a gasoline-powered car. The report also states that battery production causes more environmental damage than carbon emissions alone. Dust, fumes, wastewater, and other environmental impacts from cobalt mining in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, water shortage and toxic spills from lithium mining in Latin America, a heavily polluted river due to nickel mining in Russia, and air pollution in northeastern China. The use of wind, solar, and electric cars reduces emissions in the places that use them, but increases emissions in countries like China that manufacture them. Are we doing nothing more than exporting CO2 emissions to China? And if the benefits to the environment are questionable, is ESG at least good for shareholders, for the people saving for retirement through 401ks and pension funds? A study in 2020 by the Center for Retirement Research at Boston College casts doubt on that as well. The study found that while 2/3 of public pension funds invested for social or environmental goals, ESG investments reduce annual returns by 70 to 90 basis points. Some CEOs have found that far from benefiting their company or their stock price, political activism is not welcomed either by employees or customers. While some applauded the Walt Disney Company's activism in favor of sex education in elementary schools, a large number of its employees and customers were offended. The decision by Coca-Cola, Delta Airlines, and Major League Baseball to fight against voter ID laws in Georgia also alienated a large number of their customers.
When Coca-Cola came out and opposed the Georgia voting law, and they also implemented a critical race theory HR policy internally at Coca-Cola. A poll came out shortly after that showing that 37% of Americans said that they were less likely to buy Coke products after those positions were taken. Well, I'd love to have been at the board meeting where the CEO comes in and explains to the board why all of a sudden 37% of Americans are not interested or less interested in buying Coca-Cola products. Disney saw its stock drop like a rock. People that had loved Disney for years are now refusing to go. And it's not because Disney has bad amusement parks. It's because Disney took unnecessarily and absurdly and ridiculously took and is taking positions that are alienating its customers.
PayPal is another activist company that is now facing a backlash for its political positions. As a strategic partner of the World Economic Forum, PayPal has taken a position against the firearms industry, refusing to provide payment services for gun-related purchases. It has also been accused of discriminating against conservative groups in general. In October, PayPal stock tumbled after news headlines revealed that it would start fining its users up to $2,500 for spreading misinformation and hate speech. In line with ESG goals, companies such as United Airlines announced racial and gender hiring quotas. The problem for United is that racial discrimination is illegal under the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Violating the law exposes these companies to prosecution and employee lawsuits.
The way this ESG is being implemented is in one realm after another, it's completely anti-democratic, which is to say they are just flouting laws, they're flouting democratically elected laws and bringing things about that are at least anti-democratic and often illegal. And that's a good example. It's been well known for decades that quotas are illegal, but it goes well beyond that. When you start looking at things like the racial sensitivity training and all this sort of stuff that a lot of these places are doing, they're engaging pretty much in rampant stereotyping, negative stereotyping of certain groups. They are engaging in rampant preferences for others. All of this runs pretty clearly up against existing civil rights laws.
CEOs that follow ESG principles may be steering their companies into dangerous waters.
Some lawsuits have been filed. Some people have started looking at this. For example, there was a shareholder action against Coca-Cola when they had their sort of Act Less White campaign. Some activist shareholders filed a lawsuit and basically said, when you do that, you are risking litigation, you're risking liability for this company. And so, just pretending like the laws don't apply to this situation aren't going to get you off the hook.
BlackRock is not the worst offender in the industry. I would actually tell you that probably we're better than average. The issue is that the entire system doesn't work. And where BlackRock is culpable is that it's promoting a thesis that tells people that these products have social impact. And I can't stress enough, there is no evidence that any ESG ETF has any positive social impact that I've seen. There's no evidence that by buying a low carbon ETF, you are actually going to lower emissions.
If ESG is not succeeding in creating a cleaner, more peaceful and prosperous world for all, if it is leading us to shortages and crises, why do our leaders continue to push it?
The totalitarians are masters at this. They create policies that cause major problems, and then they step in and pose as saviors who are going to save us from the problems that they created.
Many countries argue, including Italy and France, that a gas price cap would be very beneficial for Europe, as it would bring down the price of gas into the continent.
I think Venezuela is really the epitome of this. You had government policy causing huge shortages, causing massive inflation, right? They're printing currency like it's going out of style. Prices, of course, are skyrocketing. So now we need price controls. You can't sell a bag of rice for more than X number of bolivares. What happens then? There's no rice on the shelves. And so what happens is the government then seizes that as a pretext to create even more government, to take even more control, and also as a pretext to persecute enemies of the regime. So imagine what happened in Venezuela happening on a global scale, and I think you really get a sense of the vision that these predators want to implement. So you follow these UN policies, you end up creating massive shortages, and then the shortages are used to, first of all, create dependence. Right? Dependent people are much easier to control than independent people, and that goes back to the war on farming too. I think that's one of the reasons they want to wipe out the independent producers. Independent people can say no. right? People who are dependent on government, on mega corporations, do not have that ability. If your children are hungry, you'll be willing to give up just about anything, any freedom, any property.
So what we're dealing now with is excessive speculation driving oil prices up, not supply and demand.
We're seeing the same thing in the United States too, just not quite at as large a scale. But for example, the Biden administration knocking out big parts of our energy supply and big parts of our energy infrastructure, even our electricity generation, under the guise of saving us from global warming. They say, oh look, power prices are surging. Well, now you can't afford your electricity. Well, hey, I have an idea. Let's expand the welfare system so that you can now afford your electricity. And we see people like Senator Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders saying that the reason prices are going up is because evil capitalists are ripping you off.
There's no time for profiteering or price gouging. I want to be clear about what we'll not tolerate.
These are big arc increases that really hit a budget hard. This is the reason that we need Build Back Better.
As Americans, our right to speak freely is one of our most fundamental and cherished rights. The government cannot censor us. But can corporations take on this role on behalf of government?
We partnered with Google, for example. If you Google climate change, you will, at the top of your search, you will get all kinds of UN resources. We started this partnership when we were shocked to see that when we Googled climate change, we were getting incredibly distorted information right at the top. So we're becoming much more proactive. We own the science, and we think that the world, should know it.
The drive to control speech goes beyond climate change to include social and political views.
We're a nonpartisan grassroots organization founded by two moms. Tina and I both served as school board members, and we saw parents all across the country that wanted to advocate and make a difference in their community, that felt very alienated from their children's education, but didn't know how to get involved. And we decided to start Moms for Liberty. So in January of 2021, we launched this group with 2 original chapters in our own hometowns. And now we have 230 chapters in 40 states with over 100,000 active members across the country. First, I'd like to say that I think we embrace what's best about social media. And there have been wonderful parts of us engaging in social media. It's helped us to grow our membership tremendously. And the age of information has allowed parents all over the country to talk to each other and to share their experiences and to learn from their advocacy in so many ways. The unfortunate thing has been when social media has sought to quiet us or to censor our information. So pretty early on in our existence, we have a lot of different chapters on Facebook, and some of those chapters started getting suspended. One chapter had just launched and had just set up a page the day before and literally had only said, "This is when our school board meeting is, please join us." And that chapter was taken down. We have had a few issues with PayPal. In April, a good friend of our organization, a constitutional attorney, writes a blog called Coffee and COVID. And so he had done an all call to his members to donate to us, to help us. And so over the course of a very short span of time, a day and a half or so, 2 days, we had over 5,000 unique donations, and about $125,000, $130,000 was donated to Moms for Liberty, which was just amazing because we started with $500 selling t-shirts out of a back bedroom. Immediately when that happened, PayPal froze the account and wouldn't let us access any of the funds that had been donated to us. It seemed for a time that every time I would go on TV and do an interview and mention Moms for Liberty or try to direct people to the store or direct people to start a chapter, that our website would be attacked and it would go down.
Well, our tagline is fake news you can trust. We do news satire, so we're the most popular satire site on the internet at the moment. But yeah, we take a look at whatever the current events are, the political figures of the day, the issues of the day, we satirize them. The tech industry, I would say probably the thing that they've done that makes it most difficult to do what we do is implement speech codes that have their ideology baked into them. And I can give you a specific example. I mean, we're currently locked out of our Twitter account because we made a joke about this real-world story. USA Today had named Rachel Levine, who's this transgender health admiral in the Biden administration, USA Today had named Rachel Levine Woman of the Year. And we countered that with a satirical article saying Rachel Levine was our pick for Man of the Year. And Twitter has a policy against misgendering. They consider it hateful conduct. They consider that joke misgendering. But what they're doing there is they're essentially smuggling their ideology into their terms of service and saying that you have to only affirm these things. You can't deny these things. You have to affirm them or just stay silent. Well, one of the responsibilities that I think satirists have is to poke holes in a popular narrative. We're supposed to look at whatever the powers that be are trying to push on all of us and examine it and scrutinize it, hold it up to mockery. That's our job. We're actually prohibited from doing that because the powers that be that are putting these ideas down on you are working in concert with the big tech companies to make sure that you can't do that. You have to affirm these things. You can't even joke about them. So basically, comedy is outlawed. We used to use MailChimp for our newsletter delivery. We got flagged for misinformation, sending misinformation. We were threatened with, having our account suspended there. These are we're a satire site. All of our stories are false because they're jokes. We had this other email platform, and they permanently suspended us for violating their terms of service and wouldn't tell us why. When you have social media platforms, you can build a huge following, but you don't own your audience. They own your audience. They're just giving you access to it. We can generate millions of followers on Facebook, but we post things there now that they don't show to anybody. We've asked Facebook directly if they've given us a low quality score because our articles no longer reach anyone. They used to go viral, but they're not reaching any people anymore. And they won't answer these questions transparently. The tech companies, to some extent, are just an arm of the people in positions of power in government. There is 98% ideological conformity amongst the employees at these companies. And they're to some extent completely blind to the biases that they have. They just think they're doing what's good and right. But what that ends up resulting in practice is everyone who disagrees with them is banned for either hateful conduct or misinformation.
A couple of the steps that we have, that could be constructive for the public health of the country are providing for Facebook or other platforms to measure and publicly share the impact of misinformation on their platform and the audience it's reaching. Also with the public, with all of you, to create robust enforcement strategies that bridge their properties and provide transparency about rules. You shouldn't be banned from one platform and not others for providing misinformation out there. Taking faster action against harmful posts. As you all know, information travels quite quickly. If it's up there for days and days and days, when people see it, it's hard to put that back in a box. And of course, promoting quality information. Algorithms, I don't know how they work, but they all do know how they work. So those are some of the steps that we think could be constructive for public health, for public information, for public, and the right of the public to know.
Tech companies realize that the old threat to their monopoly power used to come from the left in this country. And, the left was skeptical of the aggregation of corporate power. Citizens United in 2010. Break up big tech. That was a left-wing slogan before it was a right-wing slogan. Okay, but what technology companies realized was that, we can actually protect our monopoly power if we advance the objectives of the people who view us as their enemies. So we'll censor content. We'll take down speech, hate speech, misinformation that you don't want to see on the internet, but we don't do it for free. We effectively expect that you look the other way to leave our monopoly power intact.
What they get is this possibility that knowing that the market is now rigged, you're not really mostly worried about customers or shareholders. Your primary concern is who has my back, and the state is that entity who will bail you out if necessary, support your efforts, and help you to get rid of competitors, as in the case of social media. We see the collusion going on between the federal government and Facebook, Twitter, and so forth. These federal agencies put pressure on Facebook to censor particular viewpoints. Those companies that reflect and reiterate state narratives will be rewarded, and those that don't will be punished.
Federal judge giving the White House 21 days to turn over emails from officials, including Dr. Tony Fauci and Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre, that were sent to social media companies. It's all part of a lawsuit filed by attorneys general of Missouri and Louisiana, accusing the administration of colluding with big technology companies to censor information on Hunter Biden's laptop, COVID-19, free speech on elections, you name it, they censored it.
I believe this may be one of the biggest cases to reach the United States Supreme Court in this century. Why? Because if the government can compel media outlets on what they can and can't say and what the American public sees and doesn't see or reads and doesn't read, then we are absolutely in a tyrannical style government.
This is one of the most important lawsuits, I think, of maybe our lifetime. The government has fought tooth and nail to prevent the public from finding out how they are pressuring private social media companies. This has really just emerged in the last few weeks as part of this litigation. And I think one of the reasons why there hasn't been as much litigation in the past is I just don't think people realized, or didn't dawn on them, the degree of the bad behavior by these companies and their collusion with each other, and the degree to which the government has been leaning on them as well.
We know that the government doesn't have the ability to censor speech, especially political speech. And so they can't go out there and force these companies or compel these companies, and they do so under duress, because we know that they regulate these companies. We know the power of the federal government. And look, what we found since then is that this reached into the law enforcement arm of the federal government, the FBI and the Department of Justice. They're doing everything they can to scratch and claw and fight to keep us from getting any of this information. Remember, this is our government, supposedly. And so, you know, the U.S. Department of Justice and Attorney General are claiming that there's some sort of privilege to the information that we're looking for. I would remind the U.S. Attorney General that there is no privilege for violating an American's First Amendment rights.
We see this in these cases where the government has leaned on these, Twitter, Facebook, these companies to censor speech that the government deems misinformation. And it's pretty clear that they're not just suggesting that they've got all kind of regulatory tools, and they've shown a willingness to use them to force their will on private actors. And that's why this case is so important. Is we need to start taking this problem of the regulatory state seriously, and recognize that the old ideas of how we try to regulate government action may not be enough to understand the lawlessness and the abusiveness of the modern regulatory state.
While state AGs pursue legal remedies, a growing number of states have now introduced or passed laws against ideological investing of state pension money, effectively prohibiting ESG investments from public funds. In August, the state of Florida went one step further and took away the ability of asset managers to vote the shares owned by Florida pensioners and employees, as well as prohibiting political discrimination against employees. A public spat between the Disney Corporation and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis made headlines in April when Disney CEO Bob Chapek publicly fought against a Florida law that prohibits teaching of sexual topics to children in grades kindergarten through third grade.
Disney CEO Bob Chapek, initially non-committal, saying after the governor signed the bill into law, "Our goal as a company is for this law to be repealed by the legislature or struck down in the courts."
This state is governed by the interests of the people of the state of Florida. It is not based on the demands of California corporate executives.
We don't vote on CEOs. We don't vote on some global world forum. This is the United States of America. We intend to elect, through an election system, through a democratic process, people that go to Congress or go to our state capitals. We elect governors and presidents to basically execute the policies that are created in our capitals in a transparent manner, right? Remember, laws are created through a very transparent, open forum. We don't know what goes on in these corporate boardrooms. We don't know the background of these people. We don't know the underlying investments or the other kind of maybe nefarious activities that may be going on.
Other conservative states have joined in the effort to fight ESG, even as liberal states double down on their support for it. Wall Street giants like BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, JP Morgan, Citibank, Goldman Sachs, and Morgan Stanley have become the subject of state efforts to stop discriminatory lending and ideological investing. West Virginia has been one of the leading states in this effort.
If we find a financial institution that is boycotting the fossil fuel industry, they refuse to lend money or finance the fossil fuel industry just based on this greenhouse gas emission or climate pledge or what have you, and in practice they're not lending to those industries, not because of their finances, but because of their political views, then they will be placed on the restricted financial institution list. Once on that list, their contracts are then canceled, they're terminated, and then they shall not and will not be able to bid on any future state contracts here in the state of West Virginia unless they change their tune.
In October, Missouri became the 5th state after Utah, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Texas to boycott BlackRock funds. As a result of actions like these, financial analyst UBS downgraded BlackRock's stock, citing its over-reliance on ESG ideology. In August, 19 state attorneys general sent a letter to BlackRock accusing the asset manager of pressuring companies to divest from fossil fuels. They stated, BlackRock has used citizens' assets to pressure companies to comply with international agreements such as the Paris Agreement that force the phase-out of fossil fuels, increase energy prices, drive inflation, and weaken the national security of the United States. In response, BlackRock denied that it has used its influence to hurt oil and gas companies. BlackRock reiterated that companies that take a forward-looking position with respect to climate risk and its implications for the energy transition will generate better long-term financial outcomes. BlackRock said this is so because governments representing over 90% of global GDP have committed to move to net zero in the coming decades.
The political risks exist because they're creating the political risks on the other side of the movement. So you get the Chuck Schumers, the Bernie Sanders to adopt a really aggressive anti-oil and gas agenda. Well, then maybe there is risk, but if you don't create that risk, you don't try to ban the internal combustion engine, well, gasoline's a good investment.
America's courts recently stepped into this conflict, pushing back against the expansion of the Biden administration into the private sector. In West Virginia versus EPA, the Supreme Court ruled that federal agencies could not force utilities to switch from fossil fuels to wind and solar. The courts ruled that race-based government grants that excluded white farmers and restaurant owners were illegal. The courts ruled that the Biden administration could not force private companies to fire employees for refusing the COVID vaccine.
A year ago, I was very pessimistic. I didn't think people were going to catch on to this. I thought it was more than people wanted to think about. Turns out it's not. Turns out I was wrong. And it really has started to catch on, particularly in red states in the United States, Republican-run states, are reacting very adversely to what BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard are trying to do and to what the government's trying to do.
We've seen the crack in the dam. We've seen BlackRock start to hedge. We've seen State Street and Vanguard start to hedge. They're all starting to hedge on this because they know that they're out of step with the American people. Whether it's the banking sector, the asset managers, rating agencies, you name it, they're trying to achieve their left-wing goals through extra legal means. And it really comes down to a basic question. If we don't stop this, do we still live in a democratic constitutional republic, or are we living in a country where a group of a cartel of corporations get to make all the decisions as it relates to the more moral and policy questions of this country without any of us taking a single vote.
Wherever you are on how you address racial inequity or global climate change, these are enough important questions that we should resolve them through free speech and debate in the public square by putting people into public office who are accountable to the American electorate. Companies are not accountable. BlackRock is not accountable. Larry Fink is not accountable. This is the heart of the question that was at issue in 1776, where we said, for better or worse, citizens decide how to settle these common political questions through the political process where everyone's voice and vote counts equally. And the problem now is we've delegated those decisions to a group of technocratic, corporatocratic actors in the private sector to settle it through economic force instead, without the backstop of public accountability, without the backstop of public support.